Hey guys, Paul Wilson here again for another e-learning live stream. Today we're not going to be talking a lot about Adobe Captivate. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about Photoshop. Photoshop. Not even 1 minute in and I've already stumbled over my words. So welcome everyone. Glad you could join and we'll get started in just a moment. So the first thing, or what inspired me to do this live stream today, was actually a comment, maybe about a month ago from one of the viewers, saying, "Hey, when are you going to start doing Photoshop tutorials?" And I thought about it for a couple of seconds, and realized that there are far more successful or far better Photoshop experts out there than I am. As an e-learning designer developer, certainly Photoshop is an important skill. And I say Photoshop, I don't necessarily mean that you have to use Photoshop. Some of the skills I'll be talking about today are going to be about the skill of photo editing in general. I will be using Adobe Photoshop, of course, but you could apply the same concepts and principles, with other software as well. I would say that these are certainly a solid set of skills that any e-learning developer is going to need. So without further ado, let me share a Captivate project with you. We'll just bring this one up here. And I'm just going to show you a few slides first of all before we get into an actual tutorial here. And, when I look at this, I'm reminded of some of the principles that I've always tried to apply to my e-learning, and that, imagery, I think, is far more important than the words that appear on screen. Certainly, text on screen, I find it's obviously important. You can't have an e-learning sans text entirely, but I think it's super important that you have something that looks great, but also I go back to the original thought process of the idea that a picture paints 1,000 words, right? So you have, of course, images can convey a lot of meaning here. And maybe what I'll do is I'll put this to the chat, right? Because you guys, if you're attending live, you can put your comments directly in the chat beside here. And let me know what your thoughts are as I convey, different images, or what this image conveys to you. Obviously, the course is called The Respectful Workplace. And, it's an aspirational course that also check marks, at least here in Canada, several of those compliance aspects that need to be addressed as well. But I'd love to hear from all of you. Just, in the chat window, just put your thoughts. Let me put a particular image up on the screen here. And, this is just a module introduction slide. What does this image invoke for you? Like here, what do you think I was trying to convey? In a very subtle way. Maybe I wasn't like taking a hammer over the learners' heads here and banging it, but obviously I don't think it needs really to be, you need to be a rocket scientist per se to figure this one out. But when you take a look at, a slide like this one here, when I'm choosing an image, I'm selecting, well, obviously corporate, but look at the people. Look at who's in front. Look at who's in charge. Appearance-wise, it's a female role, strong role. We've got different ethnicities. We've got different gender. Obviously, that's what I'm trying to convey, is that, there are situations where we all want to be treated a certain way in the workplace, and so I'm going to select imagery that's important. You're always going to be somewhat limited, of course, with maybe your budget for stock photography, but in courses like this, um, I'm trying to convey the difficulty, for example, that discrimination in the workplace can affect people. And the choice. This guy, I don't want to make it super obvious, but he looks a little distraught. He looks like he's thinking long and hard about maybe being an older employee in the workplace. um, you know, and the use of imagery, like this is a very simple, essentially this is a true false question, but with the use of imagery, I can take what would otherwise be a very, um, I can take what would otherwise be a very generic slide and turn it into something a little bit more scenario driven, a little bit more situational. Obviously, there's some corporate color and things like that that have to go into such a course. But, I mean, this is literally a real life situation with the names changed to protect the innocent. But, there's a lot of ways that you can use imagery to add a sense of impact to your e-learning course. So I think knowing how you can manipulate images is super important. And whether you use Photoshop as a tool or, whatever the appropriate other tool is that might be available to you, all of that stuff is available. So let's get into it. The first tutorial I want to talk about is resizing images to be the same size. So often I've seen people put together an e-learning course, and they'll take images that they found through a Google search or what have you, and the images themselves just don't match the look and feel. There's things that you can do to really help improve that. So let's say, for example, I'm designing something in Captivate, and I'm thinking I want all of my images to look like they came from the same set here. So I've just opened Photoshop. I've got like the new document window open here. I'm going to pick a size. I'm going to go 200 pixels wide and 100 pixels tall. That is going to be the standard for this particular image that I'm going to use on this particular slide here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open each of the images that I intend to use for this particular e-learning project or this particular slide. Let's say we have a multiple choice question where you need to select the the city in which the question is about, and there's two distractors. Let's say the correct answer is Ottawa. A good example might be, what is the capital city of Canada? Well, the correct answer is Ottawa here, and a distractor might be Toronto, and it might also be another distractor might be Vancouver. So if these images don't look like they have much to do with one another, so there's a few things that you can do, and what I like to do is I'll create sort of my template within Photoshop, and then with all of these images open, let's start with the Vancouver image. I'll hit Control All or Select All here, and then I'll copy this image, and then I'll paste it here. Now these are stock photography images, so they're coming in at super high resolution, and I don't need that. And more often than not, I see so many people importing super high resolution images into Captivate, and suddenly their e-learning project, their CPTX file, is 250 megabytes in size, when the same project doesn't really need that. It only needs to be maybe 20 or 30 megabytes. So I've copied over this first image of Ottawa, and to resize it so it fits within my 200 by 100 pixel placeholder here, I can, with that layer selected, you'll notice that in Photoshop everything is about layers. When you copy and paste something into it, it comes in as a new layer. But with this layer selected, I'm going to select Edit, Transform, and Scale. And you'll see this little selection handle appear, especially if it's really large like this, appear in the upper left-hand corner. And just take a close look at the controls up here. So right off the bat, one of the things I can do is I can resize this using the width and height here. By default, the aspect ratio, in other words, the dimensions are locked. So if I reduce 100% to 90%, the reciprocal width, I'm adjusting the height, the reciprocal width will also reduce to 90%. If you want to change that and distort the image, you can unselect the maintain aspect ratio lock, but I'm not going to do that in this case. And if I was to simply resize this number here to the point where this would likely fit within this, it's actually going to resize it based on the middle of the image. This is how large the image is, and I need to fit within this little tiny space here. So what I want to do is I want to select the upper left reference point location, this one here, first, before I start resizing. And I can just reduce this number, 1 percentage point at a time, or I can just type in a number to get it down to the size that I might need, and then resize it, to be an appropriate size. That looks okay to me. Just click the check mark when you're done. And of course now it's the appropriate size. Again, it looks really pixelated, but remember I chose 200 by 100, and this is an appropriate size image if that's the largest size you're going to see. And I can do the same thing with each of these images here. Again, this is a giant image. I can go to select and select all, copy this, and then paste this again as a new layer. Use the edit control, the transform and scale feature. Again, lock it to the upper left-hand corner, and then just resize this to be the appropriate size here. Even this is still quite large, so let's shrink that right down as far as we can get it. Maybe this is too small, but you get the idea. Obviously, the larger the image, the better quality it will look. And by turning on and off the layers, I can turn off and show Toronto, I can show Vancouver, and I won't repeat the process for Ottawa. And then I simply need to do a save as, or if you're like an old school legacy guy like me, you might want to save for web, where you can choose the appropriate size and then choose the appropriate resolution or compression, if you will. And this way, when these images come in, if I save this one here, let's start with Toronto. I'm going to save this to, let's say, my desktop for right now. Toronto, save. Let's get rid of that. Do the same thing for Vancouver. Export, save for web legacy. Same settings as before. This time we'll call it Vancouver. And what's nice about that is that these images will come in exactly the same size as one another, and they'll look far more like they were intended to appear this way in the first place. Another thing you can do, let's go to that Ottawa one, which as you can see looks quite different from the other ones. You can actually do some interesting stuff with this. Let's select all of this one here. We'll return to this image here, and I'll paste it in place. and we'll resize it so that it fits the exact same scale and dimension as the other images. You can see here the image is actually 3,600 pixels by 2,437 pixels. If you import this into your Captivate project, there's a very good chance that it's going to preview as a red image. You'll sometimes see that in Captivate. When you preview your project, all your images turn red. And that's actually a feature. It's not a bug in Adobe Captivate. It's a feature letting you know that the images you've imported into Captivate are too large to be delivered over most networks, and in particular the internet. So you're going to want to take stuff into Photoshop, resize it down to an appropriate size so that, you know, it makes much more sense as far as fitting you know, in the appropriate space. I've grabbed the wrong image here. Let's make sure I copy this and go back here. And let's resize that now. Again, transform scale. I'm going to click on the corner selection handle here to make that the reference point. And we'll resize this. And this looks nice, but as you can see, it doesn't really match the other images. So what I can actually do, I can apply an effect, a color overlay, which you'll find. And to get this effect, you just double click on the layer itself, and that will open up the layer style. And you can find color overlay. You can pick a color, which may be something that you might see, you know, in the other images. Like they were sort of more darker, like they were, you know, heading towards night. And you can increase or decrease the opacity of this to make it kind of a better match. Let's actually use a color that might be more closely found. Yeah, that looks better. And again, you can play around with the intensity of that just so that now they kind of look like they belong with one another. They're much more similar in appearance. And then I can save all three images. They're exactly the same size. They're exactly the same dimensions. And I've even colorized one of them so that they kind of look more similar, as if they were taken, as if they were photos taken by maybe the same photographer. Which can be useful as well. Let me close these down here. And let's just take a look at the chat window here, see what people are saying here. Why not use image canvas size of the photos you want to use? So you can, and let's actually talk about that for a second, Jason. And I'm going to talk about a similar way to deal with that. Let's return to this original image here of Toronto. If I wanted to go with image and canvas size, image size, canvas size, and I need it to be a certain number of pixels tall and a certain number of pixels wide, again 200, 100, I'm not going to get an opportunity to select what's going to show up in that 200. It also won't resize the image. So all I'm going to get is part of the sky in the upper left-hand corner. So that's not a good way to go. I'll get into this a little bit later, but we're going to also talk about using the crop tool to do similar things as well. But in this case here, the reason I chose to resize them to be the exact same resolution and size is that you could actually save the resulting file as a PSD file and actually import the whole PSD directly into Captivate as well. But again, I'm going to get into that a little bit later here. As you've stressed the importance of labeling slides in Captivate, I would also stress that in Photoshop, you know, again, the same thing, especially when you get into more complicated things. That's actually a very good point there. One of the frequently used Photoshop files that I use, and I'll just show you here. Let me just switch. Sorry, I should have switched to my screen before. Um, as you know, all of my YouTube videos have a thumbnail. And it's probably a bad habit on my part as I don't layer them, but they're not super complicated. If I, or label them rather, they're not super complicated. There are only about half a dozen layers that I use when creating a thumbnail for a particular video. So the bottommost layer is usually an image that I found through some stock photography site. In this case, it's Adobe Stock. And there's a few things that I add to it. I have my green rectangle along the left-hand side of the screen. And within that, of course, are a couple of things. The first thing is my CaptivateTeacher.com, my website, and the Adobe Captivate logo. Technically, I'm not supposed to use this. This is copyrighted by Adobe. They haven't complained, and I've not received a takedown notice. But you should know that I am risking possible legal action. But because we've worked as partners for so many years now, I think they give me a bit of a pass. In the same way that maybe some of the fans of Star Wars and Star Trek like to make home movies about those things, and that's all well and good. They kind of get away with that because they're not directly competing with them. But yeah, you should be careful about doing what I've done here. Do as I say, don't do as I do, right? So and then, of course, with that, there are some optional elements that I've included here as well. Like in more recent months, if I'm talking about a feature that's specific to Captivate 2019 Update 2, I've got a text element there. And I'll get into a little bit more detail later about how to add text. But I typically have a title for each of my thumbnails, and I place it according to, a lot of times the image will dictate where that text goes. But yeah, I totally agree. I often preach about labeling your objects, especially for writing advanced actions and making references to those objects later and elsewhere in your course. The same best practice can certainly be applied to Photoshop as well. Yes, sorry, Lori, I forgot to share the previous screen. What I was attempting to illustrate is that just simply choosing a canvas size isn't the best way to necessarily go. But again, I'll give you some other resizing tips as we move forward. So the lady with this iPad that someone's asking about that. And actually that's, not really a tutorial that I wanted to cover here, but I will mention this because it is quite useful to know where I get my stock photography from. So let's bring that onto the screen here, and I'll just share that with you. The first thing I have is an account with Adobe Stock. And if I click on pricing here, I can give you a sense of what is typical for Adobe Stock. So you can sign up for different price points. And I would say that, starting with 10 images a month, depending on how much e-learning you're doing, this might be an appropriate choice. It does require an annual commitment for that price. Month to month you can sign up for as well. This is $30 US for 10 images a month. And, it's a great source because if I'm looking for, virtual reality goggles. Oops, I can't spell. So if you're looking for that image, that would be perfect for, let's say, a thumbnail or used in an e-learning course. The great thing about Adobe Stock is they have a massive library. So there's lots to choose from here, and you can find the image that's most appropriate. You can anyone can download. So as you're building a project for a client, you can download a preview image and use that in your project until the client has signed off on your e-learning course, in which case then you can go and license either directly at your expense, or you can indirectly at their expense. So in other words, for this image, it's going to cost this much money, and pass that expense on to your client. Another thing I use is Storyblocks. Storyblocks is a little bit more affordable in that you can sign up for a service with them. And I'm not sure if I know. I've signed up with, I have an account with them. And let's see if I can see where we can learn about that. I don't, yeah, here it is here. Plans and pricing. So depending on your needs, of course, you can sign up for one of their plans. And, it doesn't really have pricing here. So I have an unlimited standard license, I guess you would describe it as, and it's 100% royalty free. So I'm free to use those, and I get an unlimited number of images. For my monthly subscription rate, it works out to about $150 a year. If I was to type in VR goggles, I may not get as wide a range of selections, but certainly I guess it depends a lot on what you're looking for. This one's pretty popular topic these days. And I can download, if I go through all the library, there's premium things I won't have access to, but I get everything in the unlimited member library for about $150 a year. So, and of course, there's tons of choices. I don't want to say that there is only one or two choices, but a lot of it is based on what your budget is, things of that nature. This is what I would consider a premium image. And, I'm quite willing to use such an image for something as important as a YouTube thumbnail. So we have found that simply asking for permission and promising to include the provenance? I'm not sure what that means. And origination, more often than not, people give permission used for education purposes. Sure, just got to watch. Education purposes can be a funny thing. A lot of people will say, "Oh, well, why pay for images at all? Because I can just go to Google and type in VR goggles, go to images, and oh wow, there's all these free images that I have access to." Just bear in mind that these images were photographed by a photographer who very much expects to be paid. Or, maybe this is from this person's website. You can't just arbitrarily use things you find on the internet. I didn't want to turn this into a discussion of copyright, but the long and the short answer is make sure you have the rights to use whatever images that you are going to use. So let's go on. We don't want to kill the whole thing just talking about resizing images. One of the things that is particularly useful, let me close this project down. And I wasn't going to open this particular one, but I've had cases, well, this is probably a bad example, but let's do it anyway. I've had cases where rather than bringing, a completed merged layer image into my e-learning project, let's just create a blank project for right now. I might have a layered image in Photoshop, and one thing people aren't always aware of is that you can bring in a Photoshop file, a PSD file, directly into your library, use all of it, or use some of it as you see fit. So you have over here an import icon in your library folder, your library panel. If I select that and I navigate to a location on my hard drive where I have the PSD file in question. For right now, I'm just going to use my let's use my Captivate 2019 PSD file that I use for my thumbnails. I would never import that in, but when you do, you get this dialog as we see it here with all the layers. And I can choose to have this come in as a single layer comps and scale according to stage size. I'm going to leave that unchecked. I can flatten the image and bring it in as just a flat image as I see fit. Or, and this is an interesting way that you could bring in those individual photos of all those different cities. You could bring them in as layers, so they'll all be exactly the same size. You can check which layers are going to be a part of this PSD import into your library. And let's do that right now. So if you look closely here, and I know you might need to go full screen on your YouTube video, everything is brought in as a folder. So all my layers are converted to individual images. And you can see here, there's the text, various, there's the vertical CaptivateTeacher.com, my company logo, the CP logo, some images that I had in this as backgrounds that I used for different aspects of that. So I can bring all of these items, I can bring the entire, let's see if I've never done it this way before. Let's see if I can bring everything in at once. No, it's, there it is, yeah. So there is everything from that particular PSD file, all brought in, equal size to what they're supposed to be, but really useful if you need to bring in multiple images that you've, let's say, resized in Photoshop. Alternatively, if I just hit Control, let's do a bunch of Control Z's here and just get rid of all of that. I can, of course, oops, I went too far back. Let's import it again here. So I can then use these images one by one. So it's a great way to actually work with your images, and I can bring in just this image here and use that at the appropriate size that I need it for, because I've already done the resizing work in Photoshop. So let's just minimize that. Let's go back to Photoshop for a bit here. And what we'll do now is we'll go into my Photoshop tutorials here and resize stock images. So this is one of the things that comes into play, and I'll just delete this here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new blank project here. I've alluded to this already, but one of the mistakes that I think a lot of people make is that they'll download stock photography. So let's say I'm working on a particular project on this blank slide right here. I'll download some stock photography like this one here. And, we'll drag and drop this into my project. You'll see, wow, that's huge. This image is thousands of pixels by thousands of pixels wide. In fact, if I make this as small as I possibly can, you can just, it barely fits. In fact, it's not even appropriate at all. It's too large. So a couple of things that, what most people would typically do. Let's undo that cut. And let's do what most people will do is they will fit to stage. right? So that works, but again, if I go and right-click on this particular file, find it in the library, this is 7.5 megabytes, which at first glance, this is not that large. But remember, in a typical e-learning course, you might have hundreds, perhaps even 500 images in a particular e-learning course. If they're all 5, 6, 7, 8 megabytes in size, it's going to be too large. So the appropriate thing to do in this case here is let's edit this in Photoshop. So I know a couple of things. I know that that particular project is 1024 by 627. So I'm going to do some things with this image first of all. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Image and then select Image Size. And from here, let's try a few things out. So 1024, that's appropriate. 684 is larger than 627. If it wasn't, I might type in 627 first and see if my width is large enough to cover the width of the slide. In this case, it's not, so 1024 is an appropriate choice. So, and this goes back to Jason's question. This is how I would do it if I wanted to use the canvas size tool as well. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the image size down to fit basically my smallest width or height, in which I've done in this case here. Let's zoom in a little bit more. And let's do image and canvas size now. So I'm going to switch this to pixels. 1024, 684. Let's go 627. Now, be careful because your anchor point will determine what gets cropped off here. So in an image like this, I'm probably safe with this being aligned this way with the anchor in the middle. But let's say the keyboard is really important in this image for some reason. I might anchor it at the bottom, willing to cut off maybe even a little bit of their heads because the keyboard's so important. I don't know what it is, but let's click OK. So now we've got a perfect sized image. If I close this now and save my JPEG, again, I can choose maybe medium quality to really optimize that image now. If I bring this into Captivate, and let's do that now. Unlike before, oh, I grabbed the wrong image. Let's make sure, let's give it a fresh name so I make sure I'm saving it as a proper name here. People. All right, so we'll go with that. People at computer. So now I'm going to drag this into my Captivate project file. It's the appropriate size. Let's just illustrate that. Not only is it a much smaller size, but if I use my alignment tools, it perfectly fits this slide. And take a look at the difference in size. Remember, we started with 7,569 kilobytes. Now it's 100 kilobytes, a fraction of what it was. So later when I publish this course, yes, Adobe Captivate does optimize all of your content in an e-learning course, but this is going to come through with really fast, really quickly over the network or the internet here. Let's take a look at the comments now before we go on to the next. I use this method a lot when it comes to resizing stuff here. So people had a few suggestions as far as images, Pixabay, Unsplash. I'm a big supporter though of because I'm also a photographer. A little bit, very amateur, but certainly if I create something and you just took it for free, you're not really, I believe in paying it forward a little bit. Certainly my videos are an example of that, where I give back to the e-learning community. I'm not making any money for this tutorial today. I'm just sharing my knowledge because someone asked. So Mr. Wilson, greetings from Las Cruces, New Mexico. Hi, how's it going? Who took the image? I have no idea. See Adobe Create Magazine, not another free image, clickbait article by Terry Stone. Yeah, that's a good Adobe Create Magazine. I haven't looked at it in quite a while, but what else we have? The best tutorial for Photoshop at the Photoshop training channel in YouTube. Provenance. I see. Okay, so let's go on. Let me go back to sharing my screen here. I'm going to do it without the thumbnail of myself, just because I don't want it to get in the way of anything I'm showing you on screen here. So yeah, as promised, let's talk about the crop tool. I actually wasn't using the crop tool for a long time, but I've just found it extremely useful. And once you understand how it works, it really can help you out. So the crop tool is this item right here over in your toolbar. The letter C on your keyboard will allow you to open that up as well. But it's really straightforward. If I select that, you see, of course, the ability to crop the image here. Now, I can do a couple of things that are quite interesting. I can, first of all, select through a series of default aspect ratios. So like when I'm doing my Instagram posts, I want those to be perfectly square, so I can choose the square image. I can do 4:5. You can click this icon here to swap those aspect ratios. So if you need, like, let's say 16:9, you can do that, but you can also do 16:9 tall, whatever's appropriate. What's cool though, and this is what's interesting, let's say I'm working on this project, right? This project is 1024 by 627, right? So I can actually type those numbers in the crop tool. So 1024 by 627. Now I'm not setting the resolution. I'm just making sure the aspect ratio is correct. And then once you have that already set up, you can now use your mouse to click on the background image and position that layer, and for that matter, any other layers that you're adding, to fit within this crop area as well. So like, let's say you're trying to follow the rule of thirds, which suggests that, your subject in a photograph should probably hit one of these cross sections right here for it to be an effective photo. In other words, just centering everything on the page isn't very artistic and creative. So I'm going to try and keep this to just go align with this rule of thirds. There's other theories of photography, but that's a useful way to decide where your crop point is. And once you're happy with that, just hit the check mark. And then at this point, I can go to image size. It's still ridiculously large. But if I type in 1024, this one's already set to 627, because again, that aspect ratio is appropriate in size. And like before, if I save this now, instead of it being, thousands of kilobytes in size, it's probably only 10 or maybe 100 kilobytes at most. And again, it keeps your e-learning nice and small. It keeps it running over the internet much faster. If you've got learners who are using mobile phones to deliver content, when they get their monthly mobile phone bill, hopefully you won't have destroyed their monthly rate plan with the amount of megabytes you force them to download. Let's hope that they get, they take your e-learning on Wi-Fi anyway, but just in case that doesn't happen, you really want to try to optimize your content for delivery over the internet. So that's sort of my process for resizing and cropping an image to the appropriate size. Different images, you know, and this is an evolution for me, but this is, again, one of those 10 Photoshop skills that I think every e-learning designer should have. Oh, here's one of my favorite ones. Let's open up this image here. So let's say I'm doing some software training for a company. Let me just get that off of the crop setting here. And this is the image I want to use. You know what? Let's crop it first of all and make it. Let's make it an appropriate size image. So again, 1024 by 627. That's the e-learning course I'm doing, and we'll just crop it so that the computer monitor or the computer laptop screen is, you know, in this quadrant of the rule of thirds there. I'll click that, and let's just actually resize it, not just for the aspect ratio, but image size, and we'll make sure it's 1024, and that looks good there. I'll just zoom in. So this is appropriately sized for my e-learning course now. Now, I also have, let's say, a screenshot. We're teaching people how to use Adobe Captivate, let's say. And probably the first thing I want to do is maybe resize this image before I copy it over. So let's go image size and make sure that it's no larger than the size that we need. So I'm just going to bring it down a little bit here. I'm going to select all, edit, copy, and let's go back to this image, and I'm just going to go edit, paste, and it gets pasted in as a new layer. And I'm going to go edit, transform like I did before with scale, but this time I'm going to choose distort. And this is one of my favorite ways of making stock photography look like it was designed specifically for your application. So I'm going to create this laptop screen with a screenshot of Adobe Captivate, and it'll make it look really good. And of course you can use your navigator tool to get in there and make sure you're getting the corners as perfect as possible here. In fact, I'll probably need to resize this first. So I'm going to grab one of these selection handles and just distort it. We're going to try to get those selection handles to line up with the corners of the laptop screen. So let's put the upper right one there, this one right here, so it's perfectly aligned with what's on the laptop there. This is a little trickier if there's something blocking the screen, but not impossible as well. Oh, it's a little trickier to do here when you have it go outside of the range of the image there, but not impossible. So that's pretty good. Again, you can zoom in and, you know, do a little bit of fine-tuning work on each corner here so that it's as perfect. It'll always look a little fuzzy as you do it here. And when you hit the check mark up here to commit to your change, there we go. That looks pretty good, I think. Again, you know, if I had more time to spend on this, I certainly would. Let's just commit to that now. That looks pretty good. I like that. One of the things you can do, sometimes people say, well, it looks too good. So that's when you might want to use one of your blurring filters. So you can go into filter and choose blur. I like to choose Gaussian blur or Gaussian blur. And it just makes it look a little bit more real life. You know, it may be hard to see on the screen here, but this preview might give you a sense of what's happening here. So if I zoom in a little bit here, so I'm just making it a little out of focus, like, because obviously it wouldn't be quite as crisp. And you can play around with how blurry the image will be. pick a radius in pixels that's appropriate so that it still looks crisp and clear, but not too crisp compared with the rest of the background image. And then you have that capture there. And you could then merge this, right? If you need to merge this into a single file, you could merge down, and it's going to take the two layers that I have over here in my layers panel and make it one. It'll combine them. Alternatively, when you're finished adding any other elements that you might need on this particular image, you could just simply save as or export, and I still find that the legacy save for web gives me the best image size results. And I can take this image and it will merge it down into a single JPEG. And again, depending on whether you choose low, medium, high, very high, maximum, you'll get more or less compression. I kind of like medium myself. And let's just save this to my desktop here. There it is. So now I have that image as you would expect. So Lori's saying, distort is sweet. I want Photoshop now just for that feature. Yeah, no, it's totally cool. If you want to make something look like, you were designing the training and you literally had a photographer on site to photograph you performing the actual steps there. I've used that, that tool quite a bit. Someone's suggesting there, apply the blur tool to the edge. Yeah, you can work on that and apply that sort of thing, just again to make it a little bit more natural. So yeah, that's cool. Let's continue on with what we've got here. So next is, well, you know what, I had something else here, but you know what, why don't we just keep using the same image? So you might have a situation where you want to add some text to this screen, like maybe this is a title page in your e-learning course, and it's just something very simple like learning, getting started with Adobe Captivate or something like that. So the text tool is an item that's available on your toolbar here. Very straightforward. Select this tool, draw the outline of where you want that text to appear. And your text elements, your formatting elements are up here. My default in this case is Myriad Pro, bold, font size, and there's this little pop-out panel as well, and I'll show you that as well. Let's just type something here. And of course you want to make sure you're choosing a size that's appropriate, otherwise it'll be really hard to type. What am I doing wrong here? Maybe it's my color or my font size. Let's start over. When all else fails. Let's just grab a nice big large text box. Yeah, it's too large. So let's just shrink this right down to a very small size. And we'll say, getting started with Adobe Captivate. So obviously this needs some work here. So I'm going to select all the text. I often will work on text with the actual character panel open because there's things that you can do to help make it appropriate. Like obviously the size of the font might be appropriate. Let's bump it up a little bit. But the spacing, the line spacing is wrong. So I'm going to lower this on the page here. And one of the most challenging things with text in the image is having the appropriate contrast with the background. So let's just play around a little bit with getting the positioning of that. That looks pretty good, but you can see it really doesn't contrast well with the background. So what you can do is with that layer, once you've added the text, you can double click on just some of the blank area of that layer and bring up your layer style, and you can apply certain things to it. I like to add a little bit of a stroke around it just so that it really stands out. Not too much though, because it can look really ugly. Maybe 1 pixel, right? Just so it stands out, just so it contrasts the background a little bit. And we can also choose the color. I don't like pure black. I find that pure black ends up looking what do I want here? I want something. Let's just choose 150, 150, 150. Just a nice gray color. So it just gives it a little bit of an edge. And you can even do a little bit of a drop shadow. I try to keep things pretty flat these days. So if you select a drop shadow and pick your angle and choose your distance and your size, and again your color, you probably want to stick with a fairly neutral, not too dark, not too light, but something that's going to contrast well. If you want to see examples of this, certainly any of the thumbnails of my YouTube video are a good example of this. Also too, you can literally put a shape behind it, for example, if you just want to add a little more contrast between the text and the image. And you certainly can do a lot of stuff like that if obviously the text isn't contrasting with the background image. I tend to go with lighter text, and I try to choose darker images. But if this isn't working, one of the other things you can do, in this case, I might select my background image and my laptop screen capture. And let's, I can right click on these and merge the selected layers, merge layers. And then I can double click on this. Well, let's make a copy of it first. We'll keep the background, double click on the merged layer, and you can do a color overlay again to get that contrast. Pick a color like black if you don't want any color in it, or white rather. In this case, let's go black. And then you just reduce the opacity until it contrasts with your text well. So there's a bunch of things you can do. But obviously adding text to images, you don't have to do it because certainly Captivate will allow you to add text. But if you have a unique font and you don't want to use Adobe fonts, this might be a good way to get around that by building it literally into your image there. So let's carry on here. We've only gotten to 6 of my 10 ideas. Let's talk about backgrounds for a moment here. Let's bring up this new image here. So here's an image. Let's say I'm very interested in having this character, but I want a cutout character. Let's say I've been using Photoshop and I've gone into media and characters, and I'm looking for a cutout character of a dancer, for example. I already know there's none here, but if I go over to the Discover tab, which is going to bring me to eLearning Brothers, yeah, there's thousands of images for me to choose from. But if I go to photorealistic characters and I do a search for dancer, no results. So that there's no options for me to do that here. So in this case here, let's just create a new blank slide. And, maybe in this case here, ignore what I'm doing here. Let's just go with a custom background. And we wanted a solid green color for this slide for whatever reason. And I just need the person here. I'm going to show you 2 ways that you can cut out the background. I always make a duplicate of the image, a duplicate layer. because I like to work on a copy of the original and then maybe make the background transparent just by unchecking it. But then I've, very carefully not destructed the background image. I can work with this one here. Now, the first method is the magic wand tool, and this is the first one I became aware of. And it can be quite effective, but sometimes it's not very effective. So you can see here I'm selecting this color gray. It's going to take me forever to select all the different gray scales there. You can increase the tolerance of your selection. And with the right image, this will work really well, right? So like if I've got an image where the background is basically a solid image, this can be an effective way for you to select the background. So I can select the background, press delete, and just keep working this image until I get enough of the background to show through, to be transparent. But you can see how this is going to be a lot more work, and it's a little less desirable to do it this way. In theory, it would work, but let's not do it that way. So instead, what we'll do, we'll just deselect that. Let's make another copy of this image. And this is my preferred way of doing it. If you go with the select drop-down menu, and then we're going to go with select and mask. And this is going to open up kind of a new wizard here. And when I've done this in the past over video or live stream, it's always gotten very clunky and slow. So I'm hoping that my new laptop upgrade will handle this better. We'll find out. So in this case here, I'm going to change the view mode of my select and mask feature to this overlay effect. You'll see that the whole image kind of goes kind of reddish. And then with the plus icon selected in my toolbar up here, and with the, I guess what you call this would be the painting icon, we're just going to start painting this image. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So we can get a little closer to this dancer here. And I'm just going to start painting. We'll start with the jeans here and the shoes. You can just kind of paint this. What we're painting and focusing on is the stuff you want to keep. The red stuff is going to be what gets relegated to the background. And, with some time and patience, you can really get this fine-tuned right down to just what you want to keep. And you kind of do like a sort of a broad selection for starters here. That looks pretty good. Let's get into some of the finer tuning. So now I can go minus. I don't want the wall behind him here, so just get that out and get that out. And right there between his jeans and his bottom of his leg, and a little bit here. Now this tool, the second of the tools, the Refine Edge brush, useful for things like hair, or something is maybe a little rough. And of course you can use your square brackets on your keyboard to increase your brush size as appropriate. So I'm just going to increase my brush size a little bit here and just kind of refine the edge around the shoe there. Maybe get the shoelaces a little bit better here. It's far from perfect, but like there's his shoelace here. We don't want to lose the shoelace. That's an important aspect of this. So you just kind of go back and forth on some of these features here. Sometimes minus, sometimes plus. And when you're happy with the selection, I'm just going to shrink this back down. So I'm pretty happy with that. If I had more time, I'd spend more time refining the edges a little bit here. Click OK. And there he is, isolated from that background. Quite nicely done, actually. considering the short amount of time I spent on this. I could use my crop tool now to let's crop it to just what we need for this image here. So let's choose let's go with 1:1 here and resize this so it's just what we need. I'll click OK here. There's so you can see it's created a layer mask. Now we could even resize it at this point because it's too large. Maybe 500 pixels is good for eLearning. And I'm just going to save this as a PNG because that's going to be the compatible format we're looking for here. I'm going to save this right on my desktop for right now. Go over to Captivate. So there he is. So again, it's not perfect. You could probably spend a little bit more time making it perfect, but this should give you a pretty good idea of how you can create your own cutout characters, and hopefully that helps you guys out. So let's take a look at what we got left here. I want to make sure I give you as many tutorials as possible. So we did the magic wand background, the layer mask. We really already talked about blurring, but I'll give you an example of somewhere you might want to use blurring. So I brought this image as an example, and sometimes I will look at a slide, and let's go back to my project that I had open already here. And I'll look at a slide and I'll think, well, okay, there's going to be a lot of text on this slide, and I could just leave the background white. But, it lacks a certain quality, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So I might just take an image. So here I have sort of a click to reveal interaction here. I'll just turn these items off here so you can just really focus on, rather than just having a white background, I thought, well, why not just have sort of an abstract image that's sort of blurred out, and it just gives it some depth, and it obviously helps a slide like this that is mostly going to be text-based, kind of still fit with all the other slides that are image-based. So I'll take in an image such as this one here in Photoshop and just simply apply those blurs until you get, a choice that's appropriate for you. I showed you just going to the Gaussian blur, but check out Blur Gallery. If you open up the Blur Gallery, you can go through and select some different blur effects and increase them. You can even use tools like this to keep sort of a focused area where things are still kind of in focus for a particular object within the image. Optional, of course. Tilt shift is always kind of interesting. This is a lens effect similar to what you might have manually in a camera. There's some interesting stuff you can do to just make your images look that much more interesting, especially if you're just trying to create a feeling or a sense of something in each slide there. So that's something you can certainly do with your images, and it doesn't have to be, this fantastic, sharp, crisp photo. It can be something, just creative. Last one I want to show you today, and then we'll call this a live stream, is removing unwanted images or unwanted objects from images. And I think one of my favorite tools for this, I'm going to again create a second copy of the layer here, just so I have my original there, it's a combination of two features. You can use any selection tool you wish. In this example, I'm going to choose the lasso tool, which, as the name suggests, allows me to just draw a circle or shape around an object. I like it because, of course, I can just kind of be a little bit random with it. So I can draw something like, if I want to get rid of these rocks at the bottom of the water there, I can then use the patch tool to just drag the selection to an area, and it does a really nice job of matching things up for me. So if I'm trying to get rid of all of these rock formations that are underneath the water here, and then again go to your patch tool and then just select an area where that rock doesn't exist. And just to, again, if you found something like this to be distracting, you could just use this tool to just select objects and get rid of those background or those undesirable aspects of the image. You might run into a little bit of problems towards the edge of things, but again, a lot of times you're given photography and you don't have a lot of choice as to what you're doing with it. So, maybe there's something inappropriate in the image. I've certainly run into that. If I'm trying to convey a certain aspect to what I'm teaching and it just simply doesn't exist in that photograph, or something is there that you don't want to be in the photograph. A little trickier when you start getting close to the objects that you want to keep. So you might have to zoom in a little bit and be a little bit more precise with what you select. That's pretty acceptable. So you can clearly see how you can use this to your advantage as well. So again, I'll just select the rest of these there. Great way to very quickly edit a photo to suit your needs, So if I zoom right out, well, a couple more over here. Let's get rid of those. I'll just do it in one shot here. Oh, didn't get close enough to the edge. There we go. So take a look at the original with all that junk underwater, and then without, So I'm conveying. Maybe I don't want people to focus on the rocks underground or underwater rather. I want to just really convey the beautiful blue water. And so, it does what you need it to do. So we'll just take a moment or two. I'll switch back to webcam view here and just take a look at what we've got in the comments here. SVG fonts are good. Adobe called them Typekit. Yeah, I mean, certainly a large percentage of the e-learning that I've designed includes Adobe fonts. And they're a great choice as well. But, sometimes here's the thing about Adobe fonts. I need to maintain my license in perpetuity for every client that I produce e-learning for that is using Adobe fonts. Now, there is a finite number of fonts that I can sign up for. So sometimes maybe just using a font temporarily as a layer within the image, I think it's really beneficial to just quickly knock something off, put it right in the image. You don't need to worry about your font subscription expiring. I know that first of all, I have a very realistic belief in that the things I designed 5, 6, 7 years ago are probably not in use today. So I'm not too worried about those old projects. But, if I decided next year that I wasn't going to be an e-learning designer developer anymore, let's say I was going to become a professional photographer and I got sick of doing this e-learning thing. I don't think that's going to happen, but you never know, right? So I would cancel my subscription to Creative Cloud. I would cancel my Adobe Captivate license. I wouldn't maintain that stuff. But, being a professional person, regardless of what industry I'm in, I don't want my clients to be stuck high and dry without the fonts that we selected, so carefully selected in the e-learning. So again, one solution is to build that that text directly into the images, and then go with something web safe like maybe Arial, Helvetica, or whatever that will render properly on any device, regardless of whether your subscription is intact or not. So that's pretty much it for today, guys. One last thing for those in the Toronto area. I just want to remind you that this week I'm going to be speaking at the Canadian eLearning conference in Toronto. It's basically at Sick Kids Hospital on Thursday and Friday. Apparently, you can still register. So if you're in the Toronto area and like to learn something about e-learning from fellow peers within the industry like myself, I can also say that Joe Ganshi, another Adobe Captivate expert, will be there as well. So by all means, if you're in Toronto this week and you want to learn a little bit more about e-learning, maybe make some contacts within the e-learning industry, check out, just do a Google search for Canadian e-learning conference, and they will definitely accept your registration even at this late date. I saw an email go out earlier today that they're still open for registration, and I will be doing a 1-hour session on responsive design with fluid boxes in Adobe Captivate. I know Joe Ganshi is going to be doing some Captivate stuff as well. He has something on the first day on Thursday, like a full session, and then he's doing one of the concurrent sessions like myself. In fact, he's right after me in the same room. So if you're looking for Captivate knowledge and in the Toronto area, you can catch both myself and Joe Ganshi talking about what you can do with cool e-learning in Captivate. So, and I'm looking forward to meeting some of you there. I'm hoping to see a lot of viewers from my channel and get an opportunity to answer some of your questions live and in person. So as always, again, thanks. This has been a fun live stream to do because it's nice to take a break from Captivate and do some fun creative stuff. Hopefully you've seen some benefit from today, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, guys. If you thought this video was useful, please share it with your colleagues. If you need help with your next e-learning project, consider hiring me. My focus is to create effective e-learning that helps you achieve your business goals. Visit my website at captivateteacher.com, follow me on Twitter at CaptivateTeacher, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel.